Spa-Francorchamps, without doubt, the most magnificent track on the calendar. Often unpredictable. What is the outcome of this one going to be? Now Hamilton is right up behind. Anything could happen. He's going to hit the wall. He has hit the wall. That's Raikkonen. And he's in the wall and out of this Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton comes through, and in the most extraordinary circumstances imaginable, he wins the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps.
Formula One hardly gets any better or any more baffling. After such an amazing spectacle came a wet vigil in the Spa paddock for a slide rule decision from the stewards that snatched victory from Hamilton and gave it to Felipe Massa. Formula One left itself open to ridicule and abuse, but how much of it is justified? And also how much of the sport's battered image can be restored here in the historic surroundings of Monza. It's qualifying for tomorrow's Italian Grand Prix. But all the controversy has followed us down from Spa, and so too has the bad weather. We've had heavy rain showers already today, and with more forecasts we could be in for another very interesting Formula One weekend. And after Spa, we should also be celebrating the fact that Formula One can still produce action and excitement of the highest quality. But instead we seem to have a sport that's eager to penalise attacking driving and overtaking, and a sport that values the opinions of part-time stewards ahead of the courage and the talents of the world's greatest drivers. That at least is how Formula One has been portrayed in the British press in the days after Spa, and also in the many messages posted on Formula One websites around the world, that the events after the Belgian Grand Prix show that Formula One is corrupt, it's political and it's biased. Well, that's their opinion. Our job in the build-up to qualifying is to try to restore some balance and perspective to the whole argument, and Mark Blundell is the ideal man to do that. So Spa last Sunday, a good day for the sport, a bad day for the sport. Did the stewards get it right?
I think it was a great day in terms of entertainment, and the most entertaining driving I've seen in 20-odd years. At the end of it, though, a few hours later, I think it was a bad day for the sport, because I think the decision taken was the wrong one. Yes, we can argue and we can look at whether the penalty was right or wrong, but I think at the end of the day, it wasn't reflective on what the sport deserved.
Well, you're going to discuss it in detail with Martin Brundle in just a few minutes' time, but rain played its part in Spa last weekend. It's going to do the same here at Monza. It could be exactly the same.
It could be, Steve, and I think by this time tomorrow afternoon we'll have a good idea on whether things have changed. The weather really has been poor the last couple of days, and I think it's coming in for tomorrow's race as well. But before we get to that, we've got qualifying, and that could tidy or untidy up the grid, as the case may be.
And we have had huge rain showers. If those move in the next hour or so, qualifying could be under threat.
It could be, but I think we'll get the guys out there early on track, and if they get a lap under the belt, they'll be okay. But again, this is going to play into the hands of McLaren and definitely Lewis Hamilton.
OK, let's turn back, though, to the events at Spa first of all. And Louise Goodman can now tell the story of how all the controversy unfolded in those minutes after the Belgian Grand Prix.
He described it as one of his most exciting races ever. But as Lewis Hamilton celebrated his 5th victory of the season after an incredible climax to the Belgian Grand Prix, little did he know that just 2.5 hours later, the win would be taken away. Within 25 minutes of the checkered flag, both Ferrari and McLaren were handed official notification requesting their drivers to appear before the 3 Belgian race stewards. The FIA wanted to hear their version of the events leading up to Hamilton's overtaking move on Raikkonen 2 laps from the finish. Lewis spelled out his side of the story in his post-race interviews before heading off to see the stewards and FIA consultant Alan Donnelly.
Well, I clearly let him pass over the finish line, and then he was clearly.
There's rules about cutting chicanes and gaining advantage, and they are looking into that, so I don't really have anything else to say about it.
Whilst Hamilton was pleading his case to the officials, Ron Dennis confirmed that race director Charlie Whiting had been consulted over the episode.
Inevitably, you know, we wanted to know whether we had actually, you know, that was deemed to be a correction of that. We checked with Charlie. Of course, Charlie can only give an opinion. He's not the stewards, but he gave an opinion that we had complied properly to the regulation. I would even dispute that there was any fault because we had the corner in the chicane. But even if we didn't have the corner, we let Kimi back in the lead.
As the paddock pack-up got underway, the waiting game continued. Shortly before 6 o'clock, the news came through. Hamilton was to be penalised for cutting the chicane and gaining an advantage. 25 seconds would be added to his elapsed race time, dropping him from first place back down to third. McLaren questioned the penalty, given the evidence they'd presented.
We looked at all our data and also made it available to the FIA stewards. It showed that, having lifted, we have no option other than to register our intention to appeal.
Lewis kept his thoughts to himself as he left the track, still proudly sporting his Bridgestone winner's cap. Instead, it was left to Ron Dennis to sum up the team's response.
We've been in Formula One a long time, and you know, we deal with each and every thing that comes along in the most professional way possible, and we are leaving here totally focused on Monza.
A week later, it's still a very hot topic. Let's look at the incident through the eyes of drivers, Mark. And first and foremost, do you think the whole incident was worthy of investigation?
Yeah, I really do. And I think this footage here shows us completely different angles to the road. I feel he did, I really do. And I think he took that advantage to the maximum. Saying that, you've got to take your hats off to him and say that the driving was fantastic.
Yeah, here it is again. It was an avoidance move in the beginning. I've spoken to 3/4 of the grid now, and they all say, yeah, if he'd have followed Raikkonen through that corner, he wouldn't have been as close to him as he was by going across the apron. But critically then, has he broken the regulations? There are some precedents here to look at. Back in 2005, in Suzuka, Japan, Alonso coming back through the field, passes what was then really a back marker clean, but it was for position. And into the final chicane, here they come. Alonso going down the outside, gets it wrong, dives across the grass there, clearly taking an advantage, and realises he must let clean through. But look, at the back of your picture there, exactly the same as Lewis Hamilton in Spa. He ducks behind, underneath, and passes immediately again.
For me, this is a situation where he took advantage of not going through the chicane, and that advantage was carried with momentum, with speed and positioning, and he made it count when he went into the corner.
And critically, though, the stewards on that occasion said you have to let him pass again. But there's another story in 2006 in Hungary.
This is a completely different one for me, because look at Schumacher in the Ferrari, Pedro de la Rosa in the McLaren. Pedro comes up the inside here at the chicane. He's on the surface, which is dry. He's got the grip. For me here, Schumacher makes no attempt to go into that corner, cuts off, goes across the escape road. You would feel now that he should let De La Rosa go by, but no, he blocks him, pushes him out, and I think this is clear cut. That, for me, is breaking the rules. He should have let De La Rosa go by.
Well, race control that day said because Schumacher was ahead under braking, then he was entitled to stay ahead on the way out of the corner. He accelerated across the tarmac there. But back in Spa, the race director said to McLaren, I think Lewis has fulfilled the rules and he has passed fairly, and they carried on racing. Now, it's been clarified to the drivers this weekend, you mustn't overtake in the next corner. So clearly it wasn't the story before if they felt the need to clarify it.
I think we've been around a few years, and I think these guys know as well. There's been an unwritten rule that, you know, if a guy goes by you and you actually cut the corner, you've got to let him go by and start the movement all over again. But as you say, now they're clarifying that in the drivers' briefings.
OK, but for me, the big story is that did he pass him because of an unfair advantage over the finish line, or because he was just playing faster in those conditions? I think he was miles faster and it was a fair overtake.
Yeah, I think it was inevitable he's going to make the move, maybe not at that point. But for me, the steward needs to be able to give a decision there and then. That's the ultimate goal.
There was a lot of sympathy for Hamilton in Spa, but in Monza, Lewis stands alone in the spotlight. The only driver still to believe that he didn't break the rules and gain advantage by cutting the bus stop chicane.
If you ever are put in that position, the rule is to let the guy pass, and which I did. And so as long as you stick to the rules, which are the racing rules, which I did, everything is straightforward.
Hamilton has to believe that's true. Unfortunately, the stewards and the rest of the paddock disagree with him.
If Lewis make the chicane, he will never pass Kimi in the first corner.
Even though Kimi was in trouble with his tyres because it was raining?
No, because it's a so small straight.
Do you really think, had Lewis taken the corner behind you, that he would not have been able to overtake you into La Source?
I mean, from the position where he was, when he got the chicane, he wouldn't be. But if he would have been behind me through the chicane, then maybe a different story. But that's not what happened.
It's common knowledge, and it's discussed over and over in the meetings. You simply should not gain an advantage, and that's as easy as it is.
We need to think that maybe there it was a wall before. So if it was a wall, Lewis was crashing there. So he needs to step down, to do the chicane properly, like Kimi, and next 2 or 3 corners try to overtake or next lap. But I agree with the steward this time. Sometimes not, but this time yes.
He was totally in control of the whole, that front straight. He could control the whole thing himself in terms of bleeding out the throttle and attacking Kimi immediately again straight away, which was, you know, Kimi had really nothing to fight back with, because obviously Lewis, even though he lifted and the speeds across the start-finish lines are not really that relevant, because he can just jump back in the toe and pick it back up again and do him on the brakes.
He should have waited 1 corner later and then passed him, and then everything would have been fine, and he would have won the race.
Felipe got the advantage of Lewis's penalty. You didn't get any advantage, and you were the one who was the most affected. Wouldn't you have preferred Lewis to get a 10th-place penalty here?
That's from the guys who made the decision. So, I mean, yes, I didn't get any, but that was my choice in the end. So, I wanted to win, and didn't help me, but that's racing and that's rules. So.
Do you think a 10th-place penalty on the grid here would have been better?
No, that would have been even more harsh. Well, because that's going to cost you even more points, I would say, probably.
But what about Charlie Whiting telling McLaren Hamilton's move was okay?
In fairness to Charlie Whiting, he isn't the steward of the meeting, he's the race director, and he gives us guidance, and we communicate with Charlie during the race if there's flags or there's, you know, any incidents that are going on. The team managers are in contact with Charlie. But anything that needs to be looked at is referred to the stewards. Now, that can either be referred to them by Charlie, or the stewards can take it upon themselves, I believe, to look into an incident. The fact that Charlie says that's okay in his mind is actually an irrelevance in terms of what the stewards do when they look at the data and they get the rule book out and they look at previous events and say, well, there you go, there's a $10 million fine or whatever the situation happens to be.
At least the stewards were consistent in Spa. In Valencia, they let Ferrari off with a fine for committing the same offence for which others received a drive-through penalty. It's these inconsistencies that fuel suspicions that the FIA act either to make the championship more exciting or to help Ferrari. Suspicions that are damaging to the sport's credibility.
Always in this period, so Monza race, Spa race, Hungarian Grand Prix, always in the August, September, there are some penalties to the top driver standings. It has been the same last year here. It has been the same in my first race in F1 in Hungary, where 2 drivers get penalties. So maybe it's just circumstance or whatever.
Do you think they're giving these penalties just to spice the show up?
No, I think just it's circumstances, but it's quite strange. We will see if next year it's always the same.
What about the perception that FIA decisions go in Ferrari's favour?
Well, I'm sure not, because if I cut the chicane, for sure I will be penalised. So that's it.
Lewis is going all out for the victory here in Monza, because if paddock opinion is anything to go by, he's unlikely to win anything in the appeal court.
And Mark, it's all the inconsistencies and grey areas that add to the feeling that this sport has got some real sorting out to do.
Yeah, it has, and you've just seen for yourself, you've seen an incident between Schumacher, De La Rosa, we've seen a Hamilton-Raikkonen incident, and for me, I think there's a clear-cut difference there. There's 2 events that took place, one got penalised and one didn't, and I actually feel that the Schumacher incident was definitely worth a penalty and it didn't happen. The worrying factor is, in both of those incidents, common denominator, there's a Ferrari involved. And that's something which is difficult to understand for everybody who's watching and everybody who's seen the press lately.
But also in those incidents, the teams involved got some positive guidance from the race director. Why does it seem that Charlie Whiting's word counts for so little?
Well, Charlie Whiting is the race director. He's not a steward of the meeting. He doesn't have the ultimate decision in terms of what's right or what's wrong. A lot of the guys will go to him as guidance because he is directing the race. But he's got 10 team managers, 2 cars each. He's got 20 possible problems at any one time. He's got to respond to them. Maybe there was a response back, maybe there wasn't. I don't know that. But he doesn't have the ultimate say. This sport needs to have some people who've got the ultimate say there and then. It's the most technically advanced sport in the world. We should have that, and we should have people who know what they're on about. I don't think any of those guys from last weekend had ever sat in a race car, let alone a Grand Prix car in those conditions.
OK, well, despite the events at Spa, Lewis Hamilton still leads the Drivers' Championship, despite that penalty that was imposed after his apparent victory, but his lead is 2 points now over Massa instead of the 8 that race victory would have given him. And we should also pay tribute to the apparent return to form of Kimi Raikkonen. He's been rewarded with an extension to his contract at Ferrari, but his non-finish in Spa seemingly leaves him too far back in the battle for the title. Well, more reaction now to events from Spa from some of the more experienced personalities around the paddock here.
Yeah, you can always to rely on Sir Jackie for an informed opinion on all things F1. So, Jackie, what's your view on the Hamilton penalty?
I believe that the penalty was wrong. I think he should have been allowed to keep his position and to win the race. I think he earned it, and I think it was a wrong decision.
Do you think the penalty will stand as it is, or do you think the team has any hope of getting it rescinded on appeal?
The FIA are not famous for losing appeals, but I hope they lose this one. I think Hamilton should regain his points and position.
Why do you feel all the drivers have come out against him and said, no, it is justified?
Well, you know, the drivers are competing against Lewis Hamilton. Anything they can do to halt his progress, I think, is very clear. So I'm afraid I have to say that the drivers are slightly biased.
Just a final word. Williams celebrate their 500th Grand Prix this weekend. What is it about this team that makes them so special?
Fantastic. It's Frank Williams, it's Patrick Head. They've been together for more than 30 years. 500 Grand Prix by one team. So many World Championships for drivers and constructors. A wonderful team.
Thanks, Jackie.
Well, Nicky, you're very experienced, but you're also a racer. So what was your view of Lewis and the whole incident in Spa?
My view is very simple. The rule says if you have an advantage going straight over the chicane, you have the other guy go by. So you don't have an advantage. So he did that. So either you have to rewrite the rules, that you have to wait, and after the first corner you're not allowed to overtake, or some other solutions. But as the rules are written today, I did not understand the decision.
So why have all the drivers come out and said what Lewis did was wrong?
It's very simple, because always the number one guy, Schumacher, is the same thing. Whatever Schumacher said, he was wrong. It's jealousy between the drivers, I would say. This would be the most of it. Because if they would be in Lewis's position, they would argue differently, because they are egocentric people, which I include myself. So their reaction for me is normal, that they say, we are not involved, so the decision is right.
Do you think the time has come now to get an ex-racer as a steward?
I don't know if this will help, but I think to have a continuity of stewards, at least one of them, during a lot of races would certainly help. To have a continuity of penalties given. I think this would be a good idea to change. If a driver is part of it, why not?
Thanks, Nicky. Thanks for
Continuity and consistency among the stewards, and also clarification of the rule book as well. Were you aware of that rule, an apparent rule that you have to wait till after the next corner to give a place back?
Honestly, I wasn't actually aware of that rule, but that's some news to me, because there's always been a moral obligation between the drivers that if you go off the road and you get a position, you let it go back and then you try and retake it. And I think, you know, in many ways that's what Lewis Hamilton tried to do, and we were all there to witness that. But, you know, I don't agree with the penalty at the end of it. I really don't, and I don't agree in the way that everyone sees Lewis taking that celebration cup and, you know, getting the awards for it and then taking it away an hour later.
And even if the rules were broken, and quite possibly they were, no consideration seems to have been given to the race circumstances, the wet track, the final laps of a highly competitive Grand Prix, and it did spoil an extraordinary sequence of racing for the fans.
Yeah, it did indeed. I think it was a fantastic finish to the race, and I think, you know, that's the understanding as well from us. We also understand that Hamilton was reeling in Raikkonen at maybe 2 or 3 attempts every corner, and the inevitable was that he was going to overtake him. And those circumstances came because of conditions, because of the performance of the difference in car. But, you know, I think you're never going to stop racing drivers making that kind of decision. A split second, and Lewis made it. Unfortunately, the people behind made the decision different.
OK, let's get more live reaction now from the paddock, and we can join Ted again.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Down here with Alex Wirtz, a very experienced guy in the paddock. Alex, what do you think about all this discussion about advantages? I mean, we're talking about decisions that are made in split seconds.
Yeah, but they made in split seconds, but do have a big influence sometimes on the history of Formula 1. So if you talk about the last accident in Spa, you know, I don't work for your TV station, but I do work for Austrian TV. And at the time I said, hey, this will be watched by the stewards, because he opened the steering wheel and put the throttle down. And in my opinion, it was an advantage, because if he would have to make the corner on the racetrack, yeah, let's say there was a gravel trap there, he would have had a much bigger distance. But this is so difficult to decide. But you also have to understand the stewards of the meeting. Sorry, I know that's maybe not a popular opinion in England right now, but you do have to say that they done a harsh but a good analysis.
Okay. Alex, thanks very much.
Well, the decision was marginal. It was quite possibly correct, but was it in the interest of the sport? Enough for now on all the events of Spa and the consequences. The engines are firing up behind me, and after the break we'll have all the prospects for what seems likely to be a wet qualifying session here at Monza. We'll have Martin Brundle's guide to the fastest circuit in Formula 1. Just in a series of interviews with David Coulthard as he starts to bring the curtain down on a fabulous 14-year Formula 1 career. Rain prompted all the complications and controversy at Spa last weekend, and unusually in the history of the Italian Grand Prix here at Monza, rain is likely to be a big factor this weekend as well. There was a torrential downpour here just a short time ago, but we all know the kind of enthralling action the rain can bring, as long as the stewards allow it. Well, Monza has staged more Grand Prix than any other circuit, and this Royal Park setting, about 18 kilometres north of Milan, is a real mecca for fans of high-speed motor racing, Martin Brundle included.
Historic Monza, exactly 3.6 miles now. It's all about high-speed straights, heavy braking zones and slow corners such as turns 1 and 2 here. Now, Hamilton was penalised last weekend in Spa for crossing a zone like this. More of a deterrent here in Monza. If you go straight on, there'll be a slalom to go through. Across the grass and you'll fill your radiator side pods up and the engine may well overheat. A smaller concrete patch to jump across if you've got it all wrong. And an interesting addition here at Monza are these speed humps. Now, you will have to slalom through them a little bit, but you can get across them in a Formula 1 car. It might damage your front wing, and at 200 odd miles an hour, that is very dangerous indeed. But negotiate this properly, and you're straight back up to top speed. Let's have a look at the lap on board with Felipe Massa, last weekend's winner, or the man who got 10 points anyway. Towards the second chicane, about 210 miles an hour, look for a braking point and spot those two apexes. It's quite tight, just pinches a bit through the exit, up to 150 miles an hour before the first Lesmo. Bring it in early. Listen to him stamp on the throttle. A lot of confidence in the back end of that Ferrari. A tricky right-hander for the second Lesmo. So easy to run wide there, as the car in front of us has just done. Falling gently downhill then, already over 200 miles an hour. The Ascari chicane, this keeps you awake. Approach at 210 miles an hour. It's a left, right, left. Never slower than 125 miles an hour. The car's really glued to it. You can attack through the exit. Thoroughly satisfying. A few bumps under braking on the way in that can unsettle the car. Kimi Raikkonen found out last year just how much that can hurt, because there's not really too far you can go before hitting something hard around here. Mind you, I'm pretty sure Raikkonen's problem was about a third damper rear suspension problem. Out of the Ascari chicane, a very long straight up to a couple of 100 miles an hour. Nothing much for the driver to do, apart from flick up a couple of gear shifts and decide which pasta dish to have tonight before negotiating the final corner. It doesn't matter how many times you've seen the old banking here at Monza, it always has great emotion and presence. Your mind starts racing too. The final corner of the current layout hasn't changed much over the years either. It's called the Parabolica, approached at over 210 miles an hour. It's a 180-degree corner, apex speed 110, but the exit is critical. The long pit straight follows, slipstreaming begins, and you're into a new lap.
And Mark, most of the running so far this weekend has been rather disrupted by this weather. What have you learned, though, especially about the pace of the Ferraris?
Actually, Ferrari a little bit quicker than what I'd expected, but saying that I think McLaren, Lewis Hamilton and Kovalainen very good in the wet. They will be strong, but you can see now the rain is starting to come down, and this is critical for the guys. Did they make a decision of staying and going out first of all, or did they make a decision of staying in the garage a bit longer till the end and seeing if it dries out?
And we're hearing some fairly ominous weather forecasts, aren't we?
Yep, the west of the circuit at the moment, a big storm, and could flood the circuit like it did yesterday, and if that's the case, it may delay things.
Rain here is so rare, isn't it? You would never have driven Monza in the wet, I'm sure.
I've never driven Monza in the wet. I think the last Grand Prix what was wet was maybe in the 70s, so that gives you some idea. And I must admit, I think everybody turned up with dry clothing and the sunglasses.
Well, news this week that Kimi Raikkonen has ended all the speculation and extended his contract at Ferrari through the 2010 season, and that rather blocks one opportunity for Fernando Alonso in the next couple of years. We can hear from them both now, starting with the world champion, Kimi Räikkönen.
I always had a contract for next year anyhow, so I never said that I'm gonna retire. So it came from you guys, so I still enjoy. I still drive as well as I can. Of course, sometimes when the results are not coming, it's not so good fun, but it doesn't mean that I don't enjoy it. So it was not a very difficult choice. I enjoy the work with the people. So let's see after 2 years what will happen after that.
Talking about 2010 or 2011 is way too far for me. I want to try to win a little bit before that. So always my plans were more focused on 2009, and in 2009 was no possibility in Ferrari. So first priority for me is to stay at Renault, because when I came here last year, I came because I want to repeat the success we had in the past. I believe in these guys, but obviously this year was not as good as we expected, so I need to really check if the R29 will be any better.
Well, Ferrari tend to use Monza and the Italian Grand Prix to make announcements like this, but Kimi's announcement on his future was rather unexpected.
Yeah, I think a lot of people expected him to be saying, OK, well, I think I'll call it the day, because that's the kind of response we've seen from Kimi. But saying that, he did drive very well in Spa. I think there's a lot more to come from Räikkönen. It just seems that, he doesn't really communicate it that well.
And do you think that race at Spa last weekend, although he didn't finish it, as we know, in controversial circumstances, proved a lot to himself and proved a lot to Ferrari as well?
Yeah, I think he's already been, proven in winning the World Championship, but I think it just reinvigorated the case that, he is a world-class driver, and it makes out that there's a lot more left in him. He's just not been having the right run of the things in the past few races.
Where does it leave Alonso now?
Out in the cold. He really wanted to be in a Ferrari, and that's left him with now maybe having a choice of Honda or Renault. And Honda, unfortunately, are not getting the job done, but I think there'll be a prospect for 09. And you have to say maybe consistency and continuity would be better for Alonso. Stay at Renault.
Well, along with Fernando Alonso and also Rubens Barrichello, David Coulthard is the only driver, along with those two, in this field at Monza this weekend to have previously won the Italian Grand Prix. But this will be the last time that David Coulthard races Formula One at this great circuit. Indeed, he's only got 5 races left in his wonderful career that has lasted 14 years, given him 13 race wins. And as we've seen this week, the tributes and the farewells have started to begin. And with Louise Goodman, he's been looking back at the teams that he's driven for, starting with Williams, where his Formula One career began in tragic circumstances in '94.
You made your debut, obviously, after Senna had been killed. Did that make the circumstances a little difficult? Were you aware of an extra pressure?
No, not at all. And I think that's the great thing of youth, where you just don't ever imagine anything like that can happen to you. I think if I was going into that situation today, I would be a lot more aware of how traumatic that situation was for the team, how tragic it was for Formula One and obviously for the whole Senna family. But at the time, you just have an absolute belief that this is your opportunity, and I didn't feel I was replacing Ayrton, because he was irreplaceable. He was a remarkable driver, but it was just my time, and I had to take the opportunity, and that's what I did.
It's a landmark weekend for Williams, their 500th Grand Prix this weekend. What are your best memories from your time with them?
Well, I've very good memories from the whole experience. Through when I was a test driver, I remember booking a meeting to go and see Frank because I needed funding to continue racing in Formula 3000. I remember putting a suit on that was probably borrowed from someone, going in, sitting down, and even before the meeting started, Frank asking why I had a suit on and having to explain, well, you're a very important man, and therefore, and having called this meeting to discuss my future, I felt it was appropriate to dress in a certain way, which I think he found very amusing. And I remember having a sort of long, rambling request, stroke explanation as to how I would be an even better test driver if he would help fund me in Formula 3000. Got to the end of it, waited what must have been about half a second, and he went, no. And that was the end of the meeting. He wasn't prepared to help finance me, but anyway, he was happy to continue me playing a role in the team as a test driver, and then ultimately trusted in me enough to make me the race driver.
Good place to start your career?
Fantastic. I think Williams is a great engineering racing team, absolute racers through and through, the passion for the sport. I think probably got less politics involved in that team than many other teams up and down the pit lane. And not just because I've driven for them, but I would be, I'm sure, amongst many people, very happy if they were to return to the winner's circle.
So how tricky was the decision to move on and go to McLaren?
Again, being young and believing that you know, it would be fairly easy to go from a quick car in Williams, and you know, if I was going to McLaren, then of course it would be a quick car. And I remember leading the last Grand Prix of the '95 season in Adelaide, and I started on the front row, to being 3 months later on 13th place on the grid in Melbourne in a McLaren, thinking maybe that wasn't the best decision. And ultimately, obviously, Williams went on to win 2 more World Championships, and maybe my opportunity was missed. But of course, McLaren then started to come up, and from '98 onwards, I actually won a couple of races for them in '97, but from '98 onwards, had World Championship contending cars. So, and I had a 9-year relationship with McLaren Mercedes, and obviously very proud to, I think I'm the longest serving McLaren driver in the history of the sport.
And we'll hear more from David Coulthard about his sometimes turbulent years at McLaren during our race build-up tomorrow. We've taken shelter here under the canopy of Williams because the rain is now really starting to come down in earnest. Wouldn't it be great, 500th Grand Prix for Williams this weekend, to see some kind of a return to the great years?
Yeah, it would be. I think Williams are a fantastic team. Actually, I started my Grand Prix career out in many ways with Williams, a test driver like so others. You know, but I think they've just lost their way a little bit in performance, and it's a shame because we know Williams to be a great team, and I think Frank Williams, Patrick Head, they're definitely some, you know, people that will be remembered for a long time in Grand Prix racing.
Heavy rain, at least for the start of qualifying. Where does this leave the teams?
Difficult decision for them now, because they have to make sure that their accuracy of weather stations is spot on, because now they'll be looking to see, do they go and queue up and get the lap under their belt and just see the conditions, how bad it really is, or do they go and wait to the last moment and see whether it actually dries out slightly, or a line gets made by a few other guys out there? So very difficult indeed.
Well, we all know the kind of excitement the weather brought to the climax of events at Spa. What's it going to do for qualifying here at the Italian Grand Prix? We'll be back in just a few minutes with the battle that will decide the grid for tomorrow's big race.